Hi, and welcome back. In this video, we are going to do some typography basics. So in this document, we have all the default HTML text. There's really not a ton of style in this, and we want to make it look a little better. By default, if you don't do anything, the default fonts are going to go to a Times New Roman, which is what I have here, or your system's default serif font. Now, the difference between serifs and sans serifs are that serif fonts like this one have little wedges or little feet on the terminals, which are the ends of each letter. That's how I can tell that this is a serif font. A sans serif means without serifs will not have those. So a sans serif, as an example, if I change my H1, and I'm going to set the font family to being, let's set it to Gill Sans. I did not type that in. We'll just type in Helvetica, Arial Helvetica Sans Serif. There we go. That's what I wanted it to do. So that is a sans serif font. You see that that now has no little feet. They have ending terminals without the little wedges. So that is a sans serif versus a serif. It is important to note that on websites, typically sans serif fonts are more easily read in a digital space. Serif fonts are typically easier to read on a print space, so that's why more often with books and printed materials, you'll see serifed fonts, and more digital sites will lean towards a sans serif font. So that is something to keep in mind as you choose your typography for your site. Another important thing to note that when you are declaring your font family, so that's deciding what font is displaying, is to always use what is called a fallback. So in this example that I showed where I put in the default sans serif, it is saying Arial, Helvetica, and then sans serif. So these are fallbacks. So the first one that is displaying is Arial. So what that is going to do is going to search my machine or my system, and if it finds Arial as a font installed, it will display in Arial. If Arial is not found, it will then go for Helvetica. If Helvetica is not found, it will find my computer's default sans serif font and display in that way. So these are considered to be fallbacks. Typically when you request a font family, you want to have a fallback, either a standard font, what you would if that is not working or not found, what's the next one, and then the default sans serif or cursive or monospace. So you can change the order of this. They will go left to right. Again, it's going to look for this first, this second, this third. So let's see what happens, because I have both Arial and Helvetica installed in my machine. So I can adjust how I want this to look as a designer. So I'm just going to put Helvetica in front of Arial, and you will see that that has now changed and it found Helvetica first. So if you have that as a preference, which Helvetica is considered to be the better font over Arial, so that way I can decide as a designer, hey, if Helvetica is there, I'd prefer that to show, and then if it is not there, I'll take the substitute of Arial, and failing that, whatever the sans serif on the machine is. So it's important to know that that's how you set up those fallbacks when you're declaring your font family. And every font family should have the fallback to a system font. So what are some of the safe fonts that you can use when you're determining which fonts to use and how to use them? So some of the best web-safe fonts, and those are fonts that almost every machine comes pre-installed with, would be, you can find this in a list. I'm pulling the list from W3 Schools. Things like Arial, Verdana, Tahoma, Trebuchet, Times New Roman, Georgia, Garamond, Courier, and Brushscript. And this also shows those fallbacks. So if something isn't there, typically you want to have this at the very end of your fallback would be a sans serif or a monospace or cursive. Cursive being the fallback for most decorative fonts. So it's important to have those. It's important to know not necessarily that that you look these up on W3 Schools, but know that you can always look up what are web-safe fonts and which ones am I allowed to use if I am not self-hosting a font. Speaking of self-hosting a font, let's go look at Google Fonts and check out what we can put into our site. So I'm on Google Fonts currently, and Google Fonts has a lot of web fonts that you are able to use in your digital projects. So let's go ahead and look at how we can embed one of these into our project. So I'm going to select this font, New Amsterdam, to be my headline font. So if you find the font you like, you can select it, and then once you look at it, it'll show you how it looks in different sizes, at different weights, and you can sample if there are more weights. So once I have one selected, you can hit select font family, and then you can either download or get the embed code. We're just going to get the embed code, and I want to put this on my website, and I'm going to grab the @import. So I'm going to select @import, and this gives me a little tag to put within my style tag. So this can either go in my style sheet or in my style tag up at the top of my document. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that. I already have a style tag, so I'm just going to grab the @import and copy it. I'm going to jump into my project here. I'm going to go ahead and within my style tag, I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. Now that I've got that imported, I can go ahead and jump back to the Google Doc, and then I can grab my CSS. So I can copy this entire thing, which allows me to call for it in my code. So because I don't have New Amsterdam called for anywhere in here, this isn't going to show anywhere, but what I can do is copy this, and I could change my H1, or let's go ahead and change that H1 from my Helvetica Arial Sans Serif to being New Amsterdam. And you see how that changes. So what I've gone ahead and pasted in here is it's going to call for New Amsterdam as the font, and then the fallback is going to be a sans serif. I could add an additional fallback if I want to, if I wanted to call something like Helvetica or Tahoma or something at. The font weight is going to be 400. There may be multiple font weights that you can call for, heavier or lighter. Font style is going to be normal. So now we can see how that appears. What's important to note, and I'm going to show you since we're working in our style tag directly in the document, is that everything reads from top to bottom when you're working in HTML. So what happens if I take this @import tag and I move it to being at the bottom of my style tag? Notice what happens. I called that import tag is still here. I'm calling for that font, and I use the CSS correctly. But notice that this went back to a default sans serif. Oh no, that's a problem. Why did that happen? Because I'm calling for the font before I tell the website what that font is. Therefore, this is an unknown, so it's going to the default sans serif because it cannot find New Amsterdam. Why? Because it read this first and then it's reading this. So it's important if you're trying to embed fonts or self-host a web font that it always goes up top. Do not put them randomly or willy-nilly. You always want them to go at the top of the style tag, or if you have a linked CSS document, all those fonts should be the first thing that leads off, because if they come in later, they may not be read correctly by your site. So now I'm going to go and get another font off of Google Fonts that will work for a lot of my body copy. So I'm going to filter out, and I'm going to grab a nice sans serif. Typically when you have a more decorative font for a headline or subhead, you want to pair with a nice, easy to read sans serif. Oftentimes, anything that you use for body copy should be easy to read. No one wants to read something funky or different for a lot of text. So keep that in mind when you're selecting a font for body copy. Easy to read, easy on the eyes. So I'm going to select something. I'm going to select Open Sans. I really like Open Sans as a body font, and I'm going to hit Get Font. I'm going to grab my embed code, grab the @import, and I can grab that font, and I will paste it into, put it right after my New Amsterdam here. There we go. And this one has a couple more weights that I can use, which is great because then I can mix up and maybe have heavier and lighter weights as I work with it for more of my body text. And I'm going to go ahead and grab that code for myself and put it right in my style tag. And so I've got value from 300 to 800 with this font for the weight. So now I can go ahead and look at and see what that looks like for something such as my paragraph tag. So for my paragraph tags, I'm going to go ahead and copy that, paste it in here. And now I can see that that is applied to my paragraph tag. So everything with the paragraph tag is now set in that Open Sans, which looks very nice in comparison with the H1 tag. But maybe I want to have my H2 tag also have the New Amsterdam font. So I can actually add that up here and simply type in H2. Oops, I need to put a comma. There we go. Almost forgot my commas. So I can apply and do kind of a cascading style. So now that New Amsterdam will apply to H1, H2. I could even do H3 if I end up calling for it. I don't have one on my site yet, but I can have that apply to multiple styles. And you can see how this is starting to look a little more interesting and a little bit more stylized than just a standard default fonts. I'm going to do a little bit more paragraph styling here just to make this look a little more cohesive. So a couple things that I want to change is because I used a citation tag right here, that did not inherit any of these styles such as a paragraph tag because it is not considered to be a paragraph. Same with my fig caption here. So I'm going to create a couple new styles for them just so they blend a little bit better. This is just doing some of that cleanup. You will notice that there is a lot of details when you're styling your sites that you need to account for. So I'm going to add that fig caption that I can call for, which would be this over here. I'd also like to make it Open Sans. So I'm going to grab that font family as Open Sans. And now I want the font style to be italic, so that shows a little bit more like it's going to be a caption for that. And then I'm going to set the font size to be small. So I want it to display as smaller than the standard for that. And I can actually put in smaller is another option. Or I could type in my own pixel dimensions. If I wanted it to be 12 pixels, it would make it 12 pixels. I can also do different measurements such as M, which is 12 would make it huge. Let's do 1 rem, which is fairly large. Let's try 0.8 rem. And that'll make it a little smaller as well. M and rem are measurements of type. So if you are unfamiliar, it may be worth looking up what those look like. Rem stands for relative M as a font size, so it will adjust as your screen size adjusts. So I like that as an option here. And now I'm going to do something similar for my citation tag. So I'm going to type in site, and I'm going to pop in font family. I'm going to just go ahead and copy that. I do not want display there. There we go. Font style. I would also like that to be italic. And I'm going to set the font size to being small. And I can see that makes that a little bit smaller as well. I'm going to keep that separate from figure caption because I'm going to style them slightly differently in a little bit as well. I also would like, now that I've put in Open Sans as being my body copy, you can see that that reads fairly large, and it reads almost larger than my headline fonts. Now I don't like that. I want my headlines to stand out. This is a fairly dark font. It's a fairly heavy font, but when we look at what's called an X height, the X height of Open Sans is fairly tall. The X height of this is not as tall, so that is why that's reading fairly small. So I want to make those a little bit bigger. So let's see what I can do to make my H1s look a little larger. Let's see what happens when we put in font size larger. Oh, nope, that looks terrible. Let's go ahead and put in a let's put in a pixel dimension. Now this is going to make all of them the same size, but let's see what 25 pixels looks like. That's pretty small too. Let's do 50 pixels. That's pretty big. And you can see how now I've styled the H1, H2, H3 to be the same size. I don't think I want to do that, so I might cut this one out and pop that in as just an H1 specific style. Now H1 is going to be bigger than H2. So I like H1 to be a little larger. Let's make H2 bigger as well, but not quite the full 50 pixels. So let's check out font size, 35 pixels, and see how we feel about that. And that looks pretty large. But you can now tell when I made these bigger that these are now standing out a little more than they were before. Before they were a little too small and getting a little too lost. So now I want to adjust the line height of this. You've noticed that as I adjusted the size of this font, there's a lot of space in here. In print design, this is called leading. In web design, it is called line height. And that's just the space between two lines of type. I don't like how huge this is getting and how long this is making the page. That becomes really long on our first fold. So let's go ahead and adjust this line height. So within my H1, I'm going to type in line height. Now line height as a measurement is 2 times, so whatever, if you type in a number such as 1, that is a standard line height. It's going to be 1 times the size of that. If I want to make something 2, that is now 2 times the height of the font. Because this is tall, I want it to get smaller, so I need to go into a point, so less than 1. So I'm going to look at what 0.3 looks like. And you see that got much tighter. I like that a little better, that tightened that up. I'm going to go ahead and do that line height of 0.3 for my H2 as well and see what that looks like. That looks much better. I can see that that is now a lot tighter compared to what I had before.